Okay, so welcome. I am so glad you're all here. This is wonderful. It's good to be with you. And I need to click on that, I guess. Tonight, our first session, we're going to just have a little introduction to these 9 weeks that are ahead of us. We're going to talk about the history of our prayer book. We're going to talk about the history of the Anglican Church, how we got to where we're at. Okay, we'll look at the table of contents in the Book of Common Prayer, and we'll talk about why we use the Book of Common Prayer, why it's still important and relevant today, even in our times. So that's what we're going to focus on. So Cammie, if you want to do the first slide, and then the next slide.
Oh, come on. Okay, there you go.
There we go. So today, the church recognizes the life and the work of Vincent de Paul. St. Vincent de Paul was a Catholic priest. He was born in France in 1580, and he looked out for the poor and the needy and the widows and served them. He died in 1660. He actually founded the Daughters of Charity, which is the religious order that takes care of DePaul Hospital. And he's a good patron saint of mine that I have followed over the years and tried to emulate. So today is his feast day in the church.
Oh, sorry.
And there we go. So I'd like to pray the collect that our church has for him as our opening prayer. And if you all want to maybe mute, but then say it out loud in your space there, okay? So that we don't get it all garbled and jarbled. But if we could read it together as our opening prayer this evening. Loving God, we thank you for your servant Vincent de Paul, who gave himself to training clergy, to work among the poor and provide many institutions to aid the sick, orphans, and prisoners. May we, like him, encounter Christ in the needy, the outcast, and the friendless, that we may come at length into your kingdom where you reign, one God, holy and undivided Trinity, forever and ever. Amen. Okay, so we are going to spend the next 9 Monday evenings, and I hope you're going to be able to do that, from 7 to 8 o'clock. We will try to be cognizant of time and honor your time. However, I'm going to make a note at the end this evening. Next week, we're going to talk about morning prayer and evening prayer in Compline. And at the end of next week's session, for those who want to stay past 8 o'clock, we'll either do a reading of Compline or a reading of evening prayer so that you can become more familiar with that. But we'll try to stick to the 7 to 8 o'clock time schedule, okay? We're going to explore the purpose, history, and richness of our 1979 Book of Common Prayer. It's good to have a copy in front of you to help follow our discussion. Yeah. Any questions you might have, direct them in the chat or send me an email prior to our session, and my email address is there.
Yeah.
Yes.
If anybody needs a Book of Common Prayer, will you send me an email after this session and I will make sure you get one in the next week?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So like I said, we will have some questions and perhaps some group discussion in this format. And materials will be available to you after we present this session here tonight. We're calling it Our Pearl at Great Price. And that comes, if you recall, in Matthew's Gospel, the 13th chapter and verse 3. And then Jesus spoke many things to them in parables and saying, and in the 46th verse, he said, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. Our Book of Common Prayer is precious. It is a treasure, and we are so blessed to have it. It has been around forever. and it is constantly being updated and current and so important in our worship. But at St. Timothy's, probably we rarely pick up the Book of Common Prayer. I know most churches don't use it for their Sunday worship anymore. It's all printed in the bulletins because it's easier. And especially now with the pandemic, most of the books were pulled out of the book racks so people wouldn't be handling them and germs would be passed, etc. But perhaps you bring your own copy to church and follow along. Or you do it in virtual worship if you're not attending it in person. But we found it easier to follow along in the printed service bulletin. You don't have to flip pages back and forth, but take note, everything that's in the service bulletin comes from the Book of Common Prayer. It's not made up elsewhere. So every individual uses the Book of Common Prayer to their personal needs. Over time, you become more and more familiar with it. You are able to navigate it better. Holding a book during liturgy can be confusing and overwhelming, but once you get the hang of it, you can really follow along. All of the 1979 Book of Common Prayer are exactly the same. Every copy you will pick up that is titled the Book of Common Prayer 1979, every page coincides with every other book. Okay, so for example, Holy Baptism. It always starts on page 299. Whatever Book of Common Prayer you pick up, it's exactly the same. And so it's easy for people to follow along. At the beginning of the Book of Common Prayer, we'll find the table of contents. It lists the various liturgies and services of the Episcopal Church. The Psalms are in there from the Bible, the Catechism of our faith. The Book of Common Prayer has historical documents of the church, and it has a bunch of tables that help make up the calendar of the church over the specific seasons of the year. And together we're going to walk through all of those items that are noted in that table of contents, with some discussion more in depth than others. Each session is going to be independent of other sessions. So if you're not able to participate in all 9 of them, don't fret. You'll be able to go back and watch one that you couldn't participate in. One session doesn't depend on what we talked about in an earlier session. They kind of stand independently, okay? Okay, next slide there. So how did we get here?
Can I ask a quick question?
You may.
What is the Book of Occasional Prayer?
Those are services that aren't normally part of a service or the church year.
Okay.
Something that might pop up. They're in addition, they're an addendum to the prayer book.
Okay.
So over time, there's more services that have been added, and they're not in this 79 prayer book.
Okay.
And so, we're talking 41 years, 42 years that this was written, and a lot has changed. And so
Right.
those kind of liturgies and such are in another book.
So
Okay, thank
Joanne, what you're thinking at, like what you're looking at in the Book of Occasional Services are things like house blessings. What we're going to do on All Hallows Eve, that's in the Book of Occasional Services. There are services like, if you want to know about exorcism and what we do for exorcism, I'll tell you, it's not that much. You have to refer to a bishop, but that's in there. So there are things that we just don't normally do. And you'll find those in the Book of Occasional Services. So it's like blessing an altar, blessing new books, blessing travelers, there's lots of things in there that just don't necessarily need to be in the Book of Common Prayer because they're not all that common.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah. And there's other books enriching our worship. A lot of times the Eucharistic prayer that Mother Cami or Mother Liz use is a more contemporary style, and those can be found in Enriching Our Worship. So they're more contemporary things to supplement and to add to the Book of Common Prayer.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. And right now, the church is looking to update, make some changes, additions to the Book of Common Prayer. Not change it per se, not rewrite it, but incorporate a lot of this other stuff. And so that's going on over the next decade, probably.
Okay.
Our Bishop Dion is part of that committee working on it. And when we get to our 9th session, I'll give you as much information I know that I've gathered from him about what kind of progress is being made.
Our
Okay,
former
great.
bishop, our former bishop, Bishop Smith, is also on that committee.
Yes, he is. That's right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. So how did we get here? A little brief history of the Church of England, and especially I know Diane and Joanne coming from another faith tradition. This will be interesting. Let's see. The first Book of Common Prayer was actually published in 1549 by Thomas Cranmer, who was considered the leader of the English Reformation. And he was the Archbishop of Canterbury during the reign of Henry VIII. Just stay on that slide, Cami.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right. And he was also the Archbishop of Canterbury for King Edward VI, and a short time for Queen Mary I, who then had him beheaded. But we'll get to that here in a minute. The Book of Common Prayer was written to be easily accessed to all who spoke the common language, which was English. Prior to that, everything coming from Rome was in Latin, and everybody was Roman Catholic. And when the church changed to the Church of England, it was decided everything should be done and worship should be in the language of the people, English. So, thus its name, the Book of Common Prayer. It was written for all the commoners. It just wasn't the clergy, the priests and bishops and deacons who could read Latin, but it was written for everyone. And that's why it was referred to as the Book of Common Prayer. The drafting of this religious text was happening in the wake of the Protestant Reformation, when Martin Luther put up his 99 Theses in 1517 and said to the Pope, "I'm not following this anymore." Radical changes were happening. And so the same thing was happening in England. And Cranmer, when he was writing the Book of Common Prayer, he wanted to follow a middle way, a via media. And it would allow for the ancient practices and traditions of that Roman Catholic Church, but it would also have some good following on the Protestant theology as well. So in 1521, Pope Leo X named Henry VIII as defender of the faith. He wrote a book denouncing what Martin Luther had done in 1517. So the Pope Leo, he was very pleased with Henry. In 1533, we have an act in restraint of appeals. And this was by Parliament. It declared the realm of England as an empire, and it's independent from all powers, including the papacy. So Rome and the Pope no longer had control or authority over England. And in 1534, Parliament also issued the Act of Supremacy, and it declared Henry VIII as the supreme head of the Church of England. So not only was he the King of England, he was also the head of the church. And all of this came about because he wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. She had not been able to give him a male heir to the throne. And so he wanted to divorce her or annul his marriage and remarry so that he could try to have a male heir to the throne. The Pope would not allow that. And so that's why all this came about. And so in 1534, because he's now the head of the church, he granted himself an annulment from Catherine. In 1539, 5 years later, we had the Bible all translated into English, and it could be given into the hands of all the people of England to be able to read the Bible for the first time. A few years later, the first English litany was written. So we will talk about the litany here in a couple weeks, how that came about. Let's see. So if you want to do the next slide, Cami, I think, yeah. Let's see, let me find my notes here. So in 1547, Henry dies. Edward VI ascends to the throne. In 1548, English is introduced to the Latin Mass. So they finally made it from the Latin into English in 1548. And communion was offered as both bread and wine. Prior to that, it was just the bread. In 1549, an Act of Uniformity. It's the first book of Common Prayer written by Thomas Cranmer, and it's used throughout the kingdom. And it stated that priests must celebrate with the congregation present. Prior to that, a priest could offer their own mass independently without anybody around. But they said now there's got to be other people there with you. And then a lectionary that will provide all the readings, all the scriptures that will be used throughout the year is put together, and a psalter that goes through all the Psalms in a month's time. It was revised in 1552. And in 1553, Edward VI dies. Mary, who was Henry's daughter by Catherine of Aragon, she ascends to the throne. And she restores links to the papacy and the Roman liturgy. So we're taking a step back. Mary wanted things to be back in Latin, and she wanted to be under the rule of the Pope. Okay, so things change again. And she had Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, who wrote the first book of Common Prayer, burned at the stake. Must have been a horrendous time.
Yeah.
And she died 2 years later, and she was succeeded by Elizabeth I, who said, no, we're going to reaffirm our independence from the papacy and restore things to the way it was in the first prayer book. Yeah, Bloody Mary, exactly. Then we take a big jump. In 1662, under Charles II, the prayer book, Worship with Language and Practices in the Direction of the First Prayer Book. This prayer book is still currently used by the Church of England. So the Kingdom of England, Great Britain, and many, many of the Anglican members of the Anglican Communion still use that prayer book from 1662. And of course, it's using all the right ones that we know, that Elizabethan language, etc. But the prayer books we've had here in the United States, the first one was written in 1789. It had a revision 103 years later in 1892. And then 36 years later in 1928. And then the most recent was 1979.
So I just do want to chime in here really quick. Sorry.
Sure, absolutely.
The 1662 prayer book is still what is officially recognized by the Church of England, but they also have other worship materials like what we have in terms of like enriching our worship. They use what's called common worship. And I think it's more contemporary and it's probably more widely used, but the 1662 prayer book is still their official book of worship in the Church of England.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
How many of you are lifelong Episcopalians? Anybody?
I am.
Okay, do you remember the 1928 prayer book?
Well, no, because I was.
I do.
Who was born before 1979?
Come on.
Does anybody remember 1928?
I do.
You do.
Oh, yeah.
How did it change and what was the reaction of the congregation?
Well, Cami laughs at me because I still say, Almighty God, unto you all hearts are open, because that's how I learned that first prayer, instead of to you of hearts. I remember there was a zebra colored book they put in the church. It was a paperback. We'd never seen it before. And they said, these are the trial liturgies that we've been chosen to renew, to look at them in our parish. And everybody ignored that book. So it was pretty controversial.
Sure.
And 2 years later, I think they put out the Book of Common Prayer. But we were one of the trial churches, I remember growing up. And we no longer bewail our manifold sins and wickednesses, which we from time to time most grievously have committed. But those are the words I remember from my youth.
Wow. Yeah.
Susan,
Yeah.
were you guys at St. Tim's while they were still using the 28 prayer book?
Yeah, it's funny. We joined St. Tim's, Norm as a Presbyterian, me as a Roman Catholic, and then we were, I was received later, Norm was concerned, but there was all the stuff because it was 1972 and people kept talking about the Book of 28 and you know, we could see there was some like big thing going on and we didn't know what it was all about. We were just sort of caught up, depending on the new people or the people we met as new people. You know, they would say, well, are you for the new prayer book? I don't know. Prayer book.
Yeah. Wow. Well, okay. Next slide, Cami. So let's take a look at our table of contents. In your Book of Common Prayer, that would be around pages 5, 6, and 7. And they don't have page numbers that early. But it says right at the top, page, table of contents. Table, it starts with some introductory writings. Also, it's got the ratification of the Book of Common Prayer from 1789 convention, where the bishops here and the clergy and the laity of the United bishops, clergy, and laity of the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States ratified that this was going to be our Book of Common Prayer in the United States. So this was the very first Book of Common Prayer in the US. Following that, on pages 9 through 11, we read a description of rubrics and how the services are to be followed. And it's worth taking time to read these instructions. It provides information on how we use the prayer book going forward. And a rubric is defined as a direction in a liturgical book as to how a church service should be conducted. And you will note dozens upon dozens of rubrics printed in the Book of Common Prayer. They are written in a smaller italicized font, giving instruction to the service leader or the participants of what should be done at what time, and such as the celebrant faces the body and says, or a person appointed leads the following petitions, or here may be sung a hymn or an anthem. It's always in little italics.
Okay.
Even if you're
So
not used to seeing them in the Book of Common Prayer, you've certainly seen them in our bulletins, because it's the same thing. It's the
yes,
thing that's included,
exactly.
because
Yeah,
they'll all stand or whatever. So
right. Yeah.
Okay.
So looking on page 9, you know, this is the most important. Wait a minute. I'm sorry, page 13, concerning the service. The first rubric there says, the Holy Eucharist, the principal act of Christian worship on the Lord's Day and other major feasts, and daily morning and evening prayer as set forth in this book, are the regular services appointed for public worship in this church. So at the very beginning, this book states right up front, the Eucharist is where we begin. This is our center. This is our core. This is our firm belief, and this is how we worship. And then we include also with that morning and evening prayer. Prayer is so important to our lives, our Christian lives.
what you'll find outside of the daily offices, so outside of morning and evening prayer, is that most, if not all, of the other services, so burial rites, ordinations, marriages, they will all offer an option to include the Holy Eucharist, and it all points back to the same place in the Book of Common Prayer. So no
Right.
matter where you are in the Book of Common Prayer, it will always point you back to the Eucharist if that's what you want to include in your service.
Right, yeah.
I have a question about rubrics. I thought I had been told that they were called rubrics because it referred to them being in red type, but I just sort of scanned in my prayer book and I realized that the rubrics are just italicized. They're not red type. Was that wrong? Was that an urban myth or a church myth?
You know, there may be something there. Maybe at one time it was in red.
They were in red.
Ruby red.
Yeah.
That's what they call them, rubrics. I don't know.
They used to be printed in red.
Were they? Okay.
But I think probably mostly for cost effectiveness were printed in black. And there used to be a black rubric that was included in the Book of Common Prayer. We'll get there. Well, I'll make sure it's in there when we get to that place, but in the Eucharist. But yeah, they used to be printed in red so that you knew that you were taking directions instead of, being told what to say. So they used to be printed in red.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. That's good to know.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So we've got several other rubrics on this page 13 and page 14. If you want to take a minute to look those over, and if you have questions, why let's ask them.
I have a question, not about rubrics, but who were the people that actually sat down and put all this together? Were they priests, bishops, commoners?
Probably a combination of all those, but I would think mainly bishops and priests who initially were Roman Catholic, now are under Henry VIII, the head of the church, and they're going to do what's familiar to them, but also they're going to take into account this whole Protestant Reformation that's taking place also. How can it be changed a little differently? And I'm sure that as we've gone through history from the 28 to the 79 book, the current bishops and priests were part of all of this.
We Episcopalians do love a committee.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it wouldn't have been commoners. Would commoners have been literate enough to have been able to participate in something this massive?
Not necessarily at the time that the first order of worship was being put together by Cranmer. and whoever else he had around him. We mostly just know Cranmer's name, but we have to assume that most of them were Roman Catholic because this was a brand new thing that they were inventing.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so similar. A lot of what our worship looks like is so similar to Catholic worship, is because it was greatly, if not mostly, actually mostly, if not all, inspired by Catholic worship.
Yeah. It would be interesting to look at the 1928 prayer book and compare it with the 79 and see how the rubrics may have changed or been altered or added. That's a class for another time.
Yeah.
So I would say let's move forward. But this week, take a look at all those rubrics and see how they fit in and why they're so important.
Yeah, if you learn anything.
Yeah, and if you have questions next week, Cammie and I and Mother Liz will try to answer them. Page 15, it's the calendar for the church year. And it follows on page 15 to page 33 in the Book of Common Prayer. And if you look at a well-used Book of Common Prayer, you'll note that the pages related to Holy Eucharist are the most well-worn. And if you look at the least worn and used in the book, it'll probably be right here with the calendar. Most people don't even glance at that, okay? The only people that probably look at it are clergy, okay? And it gives us different feast days and celebrations, etc. And when we recognize the lives of significant folks that have contributed to the church, they're listed in there. And again, this was written and put in place 42 years ago. So a lot has been added since. So we can look at a list, but it's probably not as current as what we usually follow. So, what's important about all of this is that it gives us all these days. And the most important day of the church year is what? Any guess?
Easter. Easter.
Easter, the resurrection of the Lord. And everything in our calendar revolves around when Easter falls. What is the date of Easter? So once the date of Easter is determined, we can determine when Ash Wednesday and Lent begins. When we know the date of Easter, we know 50 days later, it's going to be Pentecost and all of the Sundays following that. So Easter is the primary feast day. And where does it tell us?
It's the second paragraph on page 15.
Second paragraph, yes. So the sequence, well, it's the third paragraph, I guess. Well, no, wait a minute. Yes, second. Easter Day, yeah, follow with me on 15, the second paragraph. Easter Day is always the first Sunday after the full moon that falls on or after March 21. What is the significance of March 21?
Vernal equinox.
Yeah, the first day of spring. So it cannot occur before March 22nd or after April 25th. Does that make sense? March 21st has to happen, and then we have to have a full moon, and it's the Sunday following the full moon. That's how
No,
it's
it doesn't
determined.
make a lot of sense, Jeff. Why would they do that as opposed to, Christmas Day always being on December 25th?
Well, because they were following the Jewish feast of Passover and when the Jewish culture was determining when their Passover would be. And so that's why we follow that schedule. With Christmas Day, that I believe was just picked out of the sky as when it probably happened. Right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I thought it was sort of selected as a substitute for a Celtic holiday that, in terms of conversion of some Celtics in that area.
All the paganism and things of that nature.
Yeah.
It has to do with the winter equinox.
Solstice.
Thank you. I was like, what's the other thing? The winter solstice, and according to pagan holidays. But if Liz has more information, I'm curious.
Isn't there a Roman holiday of Saturnalia?
Yeah.
It was supposed to be in December, or what would be our December?
Yeah, it's certainly not an original day that we've chosen. It's been influenced.
Yeah. So again, spring has to come on March 21st. And then there has to be a full moon. And then the Sunday following the full moon is Easter. So I have a question. There's a full moon on Friday, March 18th, 2022. And there's another full moon on Saturday, April 16th, 2022. What is the date of Easter Sunday?
April
in
17th.
2022.
April
Yeah.
17th.
Yep.
April 17th, yes. It's the Sunday after the first full moon after
The
vernal
equinox.
right? Okay, and then everything else flows from that. With the exception of Christmas. Christmas will always be on December 25th. And Advent will always begin 4 Sundays before December 25th.
Well, and it says also All Saints Day is always November 1st.
Yes,
That's a major feast day.
yes.
Epiphany
if-
will always be the 6th.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at, again, on page 15, under number 1, their principal feasts, there's 7 of those that the church celebrates: Easter Day, Ascension Day, the day of Pentecost, Trinity Sunday, All Saints Day, which is November 1, Christmas Day, which is December 25th, and Epiphany Day, which is January 6th.
The first 4 will always move according to when Easter is.
Okay.
That's correct. Yep,
Or the 3 following Easter will always move according to Easter.
right. Okay. And then page 16, Sundays, all Sundays of the year are feasts of our Lord Jesus Christ. In addition to the dated days listed earlier, only the following feasts appointed on fixed days take precedence of a Sunday. So Feast of the Holy Name, the Feast of the Presentation, the Feast of the Transfiguration can also be on particular Sundays. And also feast for a dedication of a church or its patron saint. So a Sunday Eucharist could be transferred or not used in place of if on Sunday the feast of Saint Timothy fell.
Does anybody know when that is?
Oh.
I preached on it in 2020.
Okay, that's one of your homework assignments for next week.
There you go. Good.
All
Yeah.
right, what is the date? Yeah.
Mother Liz preached on it at a special evensong this year.
Oh my,
So
there you go.
go find out.
Yeah. And then we have those Sundays, all those special Sundays. And then we have holy days, other feasts of the Lord, Feast of the Holy Name, the Presentation, the Annunciation, the Visitation, Feast of John the Baptist, Transfiguration, and Holy Cross Day. And then on the next page, 17, we list other major feasts that the church has special prayers and liturgies for. Feasts for all of the apostles, all of the evangelists, Saint Stephen, who was the first martyr, Holy Innocents is December 27th, I believe, when Caesar had all the firstborn children killed because he wanted to eliminate Jesus. Saint Joseph, Saint Mary Magdalene, Mary the Virgin, Michael and all the angels, which is coming up later in this week. Saint James of Jerusalem. And then we have a couple secular days of Independence Day and Thanksgiving Day. There's days when we do fasting. Ash Wednesday, we have special service for that. And also on Good Friday. And other devotions. Certainly, Ash Wednesday is there, all the days of Holy Week and Good Friday, etc. And so there's special liturgies for that. And then other days of optional observance, different principal feasts and Sundays, etc.
Do you study this in seminary?
Yeah, we go
Yes.
through it. Yeah. Yep. And then starting with 19, page 19, you've got 12 more pages of the different feasts that are in each month. And again, as I said, this is now 42 years old, and so there's been more added to that. And I did learn what that A, B, C, D, E, F, G meant. And for the life of me now, I don't remember what it meant. Cammie, do you know? Or Liz?
Musical scale.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you've got on page 19, on the left side, you've got the days of the month. And then you've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Any idea what that's in reference to?
Oh, I probably used to.
It's every
I don't
7 days also.
Huh?
It's every 7 days.
So maybe the 7 days of, no, it can't be the 7 days a week.
Well, the A would be the first day.
Yeah.
That'll be my homework for the week to figure that
I
out.
was gonna say, let's let
Yeah.
that be the clergy's homework.
Yeah. So. Okay.
Oh, maybe it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. B, Tuesday, B.
Yeah, but January 1st is not always on a Monday.
No,
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
there's
Right,
a
that's what I
reason.
thought too. Yeah.
There's a reason for it, and I can't tell you. I'm gonna have to
Interesting.
figure it out. Yeah.
I probably have it in liturgy notes somewhere, so
Yep.
I'll find out. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, I've completely forgotten about it.
Yeah.
And then more of the calendar, we flip to 31. And it talks about the different seasons of the year, and we begin the church year with Advent. Okay. And then we have the Christmas season. We have Epiphany following that. We have Lent. We have Holy Week. We have the Easter season. We have Pentecost and the season after that, etc. And so those are kind of all listed there. And then you can see on the slide the little picture that's there in the left-hand corner, the different color scheme of purple and green and white and red of the different liturgical seasons of the year. It's kind of hard to see in that little picture, but that's what we use in order to know what vestment colors to be using, etc. Okay. So I believe there's another slide, Cami. Why we use the Book of Common Prayer. First of all, it defines us, people of God, as Episcopalians. And it touches both ancient tradition and our current age. It's here and now, as well as all that's gone back to the 1500s. It instructs our public services. It's also a guide, which we'll see next week, for our private prayer. And it's really the focus and the source of our theology, what we believe and practice. Like we said earlier, the center is our Holy Eucharist. It's our common gathering as the people of God, united with each other, where we celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It defines who we are as a people. And I know for myself, if I attend a service or something, I went to a Lutheran funeral on Saturday, and they didn't have Eucharist. And it's like, boy, there's something missing here. And Eucharist really fulfills and nourishes and strengthens us. And that's the center of our existence.
But Eucharist is not required at our funerals either. In the last funeral we did, there was no Eucharist.
Right.
Yeah. And it just seems something's missing. I don't know.
It's also not required at weddings.
Right.
Those other services don't always require Eucharist. But like I said before, there are always options in the rubrics that point back to the Eucharist, because it is the center of what we believe and what we practice. But it's not always what's necessary, and it's not always required.
Do the Lutherans do Eucharist though?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
That's what I thought they do, because my mom was Lutheran, and I saw them pass the wine, and
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And then, as we'll see next week, with daily morning and evening prayer, it helps support a framework for us, how we can respond spiritually each and every day, living out our lives focused on Christ as our center. All the liturgies, there's also room for creativity as well. And the Book of Common Prayer connects us with all the other Episcopalians across the United States and the tens of millions of Anglicans in 165 countries around the world. We are all connected in a similar prayer book that started out back in the 1540s with Henry VIII and Thomas Cranmer and the people that have followed. So it's that ancient tradition. So it is a pearl at great price. It's a treasure. And it's something that should have special meaning to each and every one of us as Episcopalians. So I open it up now for some questions or anything that you want to ask.
My head is spinning. Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead and stop share so that we can see each other.
Actually, there's one more slide. Kim,
Yes, I can reshare. I just, since you're
all
opening
right,
up the
sure.
questions, I want to make sure that we can look at each other.
Yeah, we can see each other. Sure.
I have a question
Yes.
about what is the current state of the Episcopal Church with the Anglican Communion based on the past, 10 years of our differences with gay clergy?
You can send that conversation actually back to the 90s, Steve. That conversation has originated in the 90s.
Yeah, with Gene Robinson.
Yeah, well, Gene Robinson was elected bishop in 2003, but there was an issue of ordaining gay clergy even before then, even before we made somebody who identified as gay or in the LGBTQ plus community as a bishop. So every, I don't know how often do the primates meet? Every year? No, not every year. That'd be crazy.
Every 3 years, I
Every 3
believe.
years. I wrote a whole paper on this, Steve. You and I can sit down and talk about this sometime, but all the way back to the 90s, when the Episcopal Church said that they were open to baptizing, confirming, and ordaining gay clergy, we've been kind of the bad boys of the Anglican Communion, and I think that's a point of pride. Personally.
And that was the Episcopal Church that said they were open to the ordination of
That's right.
Yes.
people.
Well, the ordination of clergy who were gay was not an issue. Gene Robinson became an issue because he was going to be a bishop.
Correct.
We've had, I know personally, or have known, they're both gone now, but 2 gay bishops that were here before Gene Robinson, they just weren't out of the closet. Otis Charles in Utah was one, and Bill Montgomery, who was in Chicago, was another. Had long time.
The expectation for gay clergy, even back in the 90s, was that they would practice celibacy.
Yeah. Or don't ask, don't tell.
Right, correct.
Yeah.
So
And Liz, or correct me if I'm wrong, the Episcopal Church of the United States was the first to ordain women, correct?
no.
There was
When were the 7?
The 7 were in 1970.
Was there another country that ordained women?
Oh no, now I have to think. Now you're asking me for dates, Jeff. I'm terrible with numbers, man. What was it? Philadelphia 7?
Philadelphia 12 or 7.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Philadelphia 7. Yeah, we're the first women to be ordained.
It seems to me there was someone, and it may have been in Asia. We'll have to get
Yeah,
back to you
it was
on
in
that.
Asia. It was in Japan,
I think so.
and she was the first clergy person. The Philadelphia 11
Oh, all right.
happened in 1974.
Here we go. Florence Lee, L.I. She's in Holy Women, Holy Men. She was ordained in 1944.
Yes, as a
Wow.
deacon.
Wow.
Yes. Florence Lim T. Oy.
Yes, but
Hmm.
the
Priests were
Philadelphia 11.
Philadelphia.
What's that?
The first priests were Philadelphia in 1974.
In the United States.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now Florence was made a priest.
Eventually.
Yeah.
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 So-
Mary, did you have a question? Or are you just waving at Susan? Okay. I saw
Mm.
Mary wave and then I saw Susan wave. So I had to-
Okay.
Huh.
So, and I believe when Gene Robinson was elevated to bishop, some of the church split off. Is that correct? In the United States?
Yes.
Yes, a lot of
Susan
people
and I
left.
passed one of the split offs today in her car, didn't we, Susan? There's an Anglican Church of North America, which is not in communion with the Anglican Communion, right out on Shetler Road where we live.
Really?
Yeah. If you're interested.
We
Yeah, that
passed
was the.
You're
that was
muted,
former-
Susan. You're muted, Susan.
That was the former priest from Good Shepherd where I was attending at the time.
Ah,
Huh.
Yeah,
Wow.
Or coming to
we
St.
could
Timothy.
walk. We could just walk around the corner, but we decided not to.
they're actually a pretty angry group of people. They're very often also against women in the priesthood, so.
They sound like
We had former members from here who moved to that church.
If you're ever
Wow.
interested in learning more about how ACNA kind of split, I would use South Carolina as an example because they actually lost a lot of their property in a court
Right.
case between ACNA and the Episcopal Church and ACTA 1. And
What is-
a lot of their property during the
Anglican
schism
Church
in
of North America.
2014. Yeah, look up the Diocese of South Carolina and just see what happened there because it's really
But
fascinating.
Cammie, not to jump in, but the Diocese of Chicago in 2018 won their court case, and all the people that left for ACNA had to give up the buildings.
Well, and who just lost?
So it's
Fort Worth?
come,
Fort Worth just
Yeah.
lost a lot of their properties to ACNA as well. It's an interesting thing to look at. We don't obviously have time for that, but if you are interested in that at all, it's a very fascinating thing to learn about. Well, let me share your last slide here, Jeff, so that
Yeah.
in the interest of
All right.
time, because we're at 8 o'clock already. We knew this was going
Yes.
to happen. So here, so the next slide that you had was what will you take away from tonight?
So have you learned anything? That's my question.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Will you come back next week?
Absolutely.
All right. All right. And if you are, then Cammy, show that slide that's got the homework assignment.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so for next week, we're going to cover pages 35 to 146 and pages 879 to 1001. And that's
Oh, I'm
going to
not coming.
cover morning prayer, evening prayer, compline, and other prayer. And it's also going to cover the church liturgical calendar. Okay, that's those pages way in the back. And I'll show you how you determine what the particular scripture readings are for those daily prayers. Okay.
And you
So
said
look-
you don't need to read every single word of every.
Oh, gosh, no. No. But just look them over and get a little familiar with it, especially morning and evening prayer and compline. And do not fret about the confusion of the tables in the very back when you're reading, when the readings of the Psalms are used. We'll discuss all
it's
that
not
in
in
detail.
here. It's not in Shattuck and Heffling, and it's not in Marion Hatchet. What those letters are, Jeff. I don't know how we're gonna find.
Oh, all right. Okay.
I know I have.
Call Ruth
notes.
Myers.
I know I have notes. I'll find them.
I would think
Okay.
Hatchet would have it. Wow. Okay. And then just think about all we've covered this evening and reflect on the history and the richness that we have in our prayer book and the millions of faithful witnesses who've used these very traditions that we continue to use now. Just contemplate that over the next week. And then I'll add next week when we wrap up, and we'll try to be done at 8 o'clock, we'll spend the next 15 minutes or so for people who want to stay longer. We'll go through the rite of compline and we'll pray that together. If you
Whoops. If you're interested.
Good.
right. Yes, it's not mandatory.
Yeah. Yeah, you froze
No.
there for a second, at least on my end, Jeff. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. No, if you would like to stay a little longer and say that prayer at the end of the night, we'll do that. But there's no pressure to hang on.
If we're
Okay.
gonna miss,
And
I'm gonna-
just so
next
you know,
sorry, Liz.
what? No, go.
I was just gonna say, where can we find next week's? Because I'm gonna miss it. YouTube? Is it gonna be on our YouTube channel?
It'll be on YouTube on Tuesday morning,
Okay,
sometime on Tuesday morning.
thanks.
And the written one will be in the,
We'll send you,
on Tim
it'll be linked in Tim's
Tim's
Times, but
Times.
I will also send, like tonight's, I'll send all of these notes to you guys. I took roll of who's here, so.
Okay.
So I'll make sure you get them. And so Susan, I'll make sure that you're on that list for next week as well, so that you have those notes. And then the YouTube link, I will also send to those who are here and to everybody who wants to be here but can't be, so.
And a shameless plug, on the St. Timothy's website, there is a recording of Compline that you can access at any time.
Oh, good. Good.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
What is
Well,
complex?
It's
Compliment-
night prayer,
Yep, night
Oh.
prayers.
called night
Yeah.
prayers. And it's,
Yeah.
my husband and I said it together every night for 34 years of marriage. It's just a lovely service. Anyway,
Yeah.
you can listen to it if you go on the website, look at, or even on the Tim's Times, isn't it linked there every week too? I think.
Yes, at the very bottom.
Worship, under that pile that says worship opportunities, you can click on that. It's my voice, but you can hear it. It's the easiest, most lovely prayer. It's how I go to bed at night.
Mhm.
So,
And I'll make sure that that stays recorded so that that's also included in the YouTube clip. So if you ever want to access that, what we do at the close of these sessions, I'll make sure that that stays there.
good.
Okay. Mother Cammy, you want to pray us out?
I would be honored. The Lord be with you.
And
Also with
also,
you.
Let's pray. O Lord, support us all the day long until the shadows lengthen and the evening comes and the busy world is hushed and the fever of life is over and our work is done. Then in your mercy, grant us a safe lodging and a holy rest and peace at the last. Amen.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone have a
you.
wonderful
Next
night.
week.
Yeah,
Restful.
Also,
Bye,
that prayer's in
everybody.
the Book of Common Prayer, and if you find that prayer I just prayed, it's called In the Evening. Bonus points from me, or like a special blessing or something I'll give you. Good night,
All
everyone.
right.
Sounds
God
good. Thank
bless.
you.
Bye, thank
See
you.
See you Sunday,
Okay, okay.
if not sooner.